Ford Motor Company stands as one of the largest automobile manufacturers in the world. Its trucks dominate American highways, its Mustang has become an icon of freedom, and its logo, a simple blue oval, carries over a century of industrial triumph. The empire is worth billions, employing hundreds of thousands, shaping not only how people travel but how modern economies function. To most, the name Ford symbolizes progress, efficiency, and the American dream. But behind this empire lies the story of a man whose vision transformed the world and whose flaws nearly destroyed his legacy. Henry Ford was not just an inventor or a businessman. He was a revolutionary who tore down the barriers between rich and poor, putting cars into the hands of ordinary families. He promised freedom on four wheels, and for millions, he delivered. In doing so, he reshaped the 20th century, forever altering the rhythm of life, work, and even the landscape of cities. Yet, like so many men who stand too close to greatness, Ford's light was shadowed by darkness. He was hailed as a genius, but feared as a tyrant. He preached morality, but spied on his workers and controlled their private lives. He gave the world mobility, but also spread ideas that fueled hatred and division. His anti-Semitic writings shocked the world, staining his reputation forever. And his refusal to adapt, his obsession with control, turned triumph into decline. This is the paradox of Henry Ford, the man who built America's dream and the man who birthed its nightmare. His story is not simply about cars, factories, or money. It is about power, ego, and the fragile line between creation and destruction. But to understand the man behind the machine, we must travel back long before the assembly lines, before the Model T, before the world knew his name. We must return to the boy from a poor Michigan farm, a boy who took apart clocks just to see how they worked, never knowing that one day he would dismantle the way the entire world moved. And that is where the story begins. Henry Ford was born on the 30th of July, 1863, in a modest farmhouse in Greenfield Township, Michigan, a rural world defined by endless fields, hard labor, and little comfort. His father, William Ford, was an Irish immigrant farmer who believed in the virtue of tilling the soil. His mother, Mary Lidegaard Ford, was of Belgian descent, a warm but stern presence who kept the household together. The Fords were not destitute, but life on a 19th century farm was unforgiving. Every day revolved around survival, tending to crops, caring for livestock, mending tools. From the beginning, young Henry felt out of place. While his father envisioned that his son would one day inherit the farm, Henry loathed the monotony of agriculture. To him, the fields were not a source of pride, but a prison. He once confessed that he never had any particular love for the farm, it was the machines I loved. For a boy surrounded by wagons, plows, and the crude mechanics of the era, every piece of metal held a mystery waiting to be solved. That fascination revealed itself early. By the age of 12, Henry was dismantling pocket watches and reassembling them for neighbors, earning a reputation as the local watch repair boy. The villagers were astonished by his skill. What seemed like delicate magic was, for him, nothing more than curiosity. He was not yet an inventor, but the spark was undeniable. But life soon dealt Henry a devastating blow. In 1876, when he was just 13, his mother died suddenly of complications from childbirth. For Henry, the loss was shattering. Mary had been the anchor of his world, and her absence left a hollow space he never filled. Later in life, he would often say that the day of her death was the darkest day of his childhood. His grief hardened him, giving rise to a restless determination. He would not remain chained to the farm like his father. By 16, Henry had left home altogether. He walked to Detroit, 20 miles away, with little more than ambition in his pocket. There, he apprenticed at a machine shop, immersing himself in the clang and roar of steam engines, boilers, and iron tools. The transition was brutal, long hours, dangerous conditions, meager pay, but to Henry, it was paradise compared to the dull repetition of farming. He was finally where he belonged, among machines. Detroit, in the late 1872, was a city on the cusp of transformation. Railroads, foundries, and factories sprouted across the skyline, and young Henry drank in every sight and sound. He studied engines with an obsession bordering on mania, memorizing the movements of pistons, gears, and flywheels. He saw in them the future something faster, stronger, more powerful than any horse-drawn wagon. Though he had little formal education, Henry's mind was a laboratory of ideas. He believed that machines could free mankind from drudgery, that technology could democratize life itself. But no one around him, least of all his father, could see the scope of his vision. To William Ford, Henry was a dreamer who had turned his back on tradition. To Henry, he was simply chasing destiny. The boy from the Michigan farm had found his path. What he could not know was that his relentless pursuit of machines would soon make him one of the most powerful men in America. But before the glory of Ford Motor, before the Model T and the assembly line, Henry Ford would endure years of failure, rejection, and humiliation tests that would either break him or forge him into a legend. And those trials were about to begin. By the early 1882nd, Henry Ford had escaped the farm and immersed himself in Detroit's industrial heart. He worked as an apprentice machinist, earning pennies for back-breaking hours. Yet, rather than breaking his spirit, the noise of hammers and the hiss of steam engines filled him with purpose. He spent every free moment tinkering, studying, and experimenting. In 1891, Henry secured a job as an engineer at the Edison Illuminating Company, a position that finally gave him stability. But stability was not what Henry wanted. The young man was obsessed with a vision: to build a horseless carriage. Automobiles already existed, but they were toys of the wealthy, unreliable, expensive, and impractical. Henry dreamed of creating something different, a machine so simple and affordable that even a farmer could own one. His early attempts, however, bordered on disaster. In 1893, he built his first crude gasoline engine in a small shed behind his home. 2 years later, he completed the quadricycle, a strange contraption of 4 bicycle wheels, a light frame, and a sputtering engine. It rattled and roared through Detroit streets, astonishing some and alarming others. Yet, for all its novelty, no one believed in it. Investors saw it as a curiosity, not a future. Ford was undeterred. With the encouragement of his wife Clara, he began seeking financial backers. In 1899, with the support of wealthy investors, he founded the Detroit Automobile Company, his first real chance to prove himself. But almost immediately, the dream unraveled. Henry, ever the perfectionist, spent too much time redesigning engines and too little time producing vehicles. The cars that did emerge were heavy, unreliable, and overpriced. Within 2 years, the company collapsed, leaving him embarrassed and broke. Most men would have surrendered, but Ford's failure only deepened his conviction. He returned to his workshop, convinced he could do better. In 1901, he tried again, forming the Henry Ford Company. This time, the stakes were higher, and investors demanded quick results. But once again, Ford clashed with partners who wanted immediate profits, while he obsessed over improving his designs. In frustration, he walked away, leaving behind not only his second failed company, but also his own name, which would soon be adopted by others without him. By now, Henry was gaining a reputation in Detroit, not as a visionary, but as a dreamer who couldn't deliver. Whispers followed him. He was unreliable, reckless, and perhaps even foolish. Rivals dismissed him, bankers refused to fund him, and even friends urged him to give up. But Clara stood by his side, encouraging him to keep building. Ford's response was not to retreat, but to race. In 1901, he stunned the city by entering a homemade race car into a Detroit competition. His machine, lighter and faster than anything on the track, roared to victory against professional drivers. Overnight, his reputation shifted. Henry Ford was no longer just a failed businessman, he was an innovator who could command speed and power. The victory drew the attention of new investors, and once again, he was offered another chance. Still, the ghost of failure haunted him. Twice he had tried, twice he had been cast aside. Each setback had stripped him of credibility, and his persistence teetered on the edge of obsession. He was a man who had nothing but an idea, and the world was running out of patience. Yet, from the ruins of these failures, Henry Ford was sharpening his vision. He understood that success would not come from building luxury toys for the elite, but from creating a machine for the masses. The failures had humbled him, taught him discipline, and instilled in him a singular clarity. The next attempt would be different. It would not simply change his life, it would change the world. And in 1903, that chance finally came. By 1903, Henry Ford was standing at a crossroads. Twice he had failed, Twice investors had walked away, and his credibility was fragile at best. Yet in that year, with the backing of Alexander Malcolmson, a Detroit coal dealer, and a handful of other investors, Henry founded what would become his true legacy, the Ford Motor Company. Unlike his previous ventures, this time he was determined to strike the balance between vision and practicality. The timing was perfect. America was racing toward modernity. Factories were multiplying, railroads crisscrossed the land, and cities swelled with workers seeking opportunity. The automobile was no longer just a curiosity. It was the future. Wealthy Americans were beginning to buy cars, but the vehicles were still clumsy, unreliable, and reserved for the elite. Ford believed he could change that. His dream was radical. He would build a car for the common man. That dream came to life in 1908 with the arrival of the Model T. At first glance, it was nothing extraordinary. A boxy, modest vehicle with a 4-cylinder engine and a top speed of 45 miles per hour. But its brilliance was in its simplicity. The Model T was durable enough for rough country roads, easy enough for a novice to drive, and most importantly, affordable. Ford sold it for $850, far less than competitors. In a world where cars were still luxury playthings, this was revolutionary. The public responded instantly. Farmers, factory workers, teachers, and shopkeepers lined up to buy the Model T. For the first time, mobility was not reserved for the rich. It was freedom on 4 wheels, and Henry Ford was the man delivering it. Sales exploded. By 1914, nearly half of all cars in America were Model Ts. But Henry Ford's true genius lay not only in the car itself, but in how it was made. Obsessed with efficiency, he studied slaughterhouses in Chicago where animals were disassembled piece by piece along a line. If death could be organized so efficiently, he thought, why not life? In 1913, Ford introduced the moving assembly line to automobile production. Instead of workers moving around the car moved past the workers, each performing a single task. The impact was seismic. Production time for a single car dropped from 12 hours to just 90 minutes. Costs plummeted. By 1916, the price of the Model T had fallen to just $360, putting it within reach of nearly every American household. Ford had not only built a car, he had reinvented industry itself. The assembly line became the blueprint for the modern factory, influencing everything from consumer goods to warfare. Ford's empire grew at an astonishing pace. Plants multiplied across America and overseas. His personal fortune soared into the hundreds of millions. Newspapers hailed him as a genius, a hero, even a prophet of democracy. In 1914, he shocked the business world by doubling the daily wage of his factory workers to $5 a move, critics called reckless, but which turned out to be brilliant. With higher pay, workers stayed loyal, productivity increased, and perhaps most ingeniously, they could now afford to buy the very cars they built. For a time, Henry Ford seemed untouchable. He had given the world the Model T, reshaped the economy with the assembly line, and rewritten the rules of both labor and industry. He was not merely building cars, he was building a new America. To many, he embodied the American dream itself, a farm boy with little education who rose to command an empire. Yet beneath the triumphs, shadows lingered. Ford's empire was built on iron discipline. His obsession with control would soon stretch far beyond his factories, invading the lives of his workers and even his own family. The man who gave the world freedom of movement was, paradoxically, a man desperate to control everything and everyone around him. The glory of the Model T and the assembly line would cement Henry Ford as one of the greatest industrialists in history. But the very qualities that lifted him to greatness, his stubbornness, his certainty, his refusal to compromise, would soon lead him down a darker road. And as the 1922nd unfolded, the world would discover the troubling truth about the man behind the machine. At the height of his power, Henry Ford was hailed as the very embodiment of progress. He had given America affordable cars, revolutionized industry, and lifted thousands of workers into the middle class. But power has a way of magnifying flaws, and in Henry Ford's case, those flaws would reveal a side of him far darker than the shining machines rolling out of his factories. Ford was obsessed with control. To him, efficiency was not limited to machines. It extended to people's lives. In 1914, alongside his famous $5 workday, Ford established the Sociological Department, a unit within his company tasked with monitoring employees' private lives. Inspectors visited workers' homes, checking for cleanliness, sobriety, and moral character. Those who failed to meet Ford's standards, immigrants who struggled with English, families who drank, or men who gambled risked losing their jobs. What looked like generosity in wages came with strings attached. Ford demanded not only labor but loyalty and conformity. His authoritarian streak extended to his own family. Henry clashed bitterly with his only son, Edsel Ford, who had a more modern, refined vision for the company. Henry belittled Edsel's ideas, overruled his decisions, and undermined his authority. In the boardroom, Edsel was nominally president, but in truth, Henry held all the power. This toxic relationship weighed heavily on Edsel, who eventually succumbed to stomach cancer at the age of 49, a death many believed was hastened by the stress of living in his father's shadow. But perhaps Henry Ford's darkest legacy was his ideology. Beginning in 1918, he purchased a small local newspaper, the Dearborn Independent. Through it, he published a series of virulent anti-Semitic articles, later compiled into a book called The International Jew. These writings accused Jewish people of conspiring to control banks, media, and society. The material spread far beyond Michigan, translated into multiple languages, and even influenced extremists abroad. Adolf Hitler himself praised Ford in Mein Kampf, calling him an inspiration. The scandal tarnished Ford's reputation permanently. Jewish organizations across America condemned him, and lawsuits followed. Eventually, under pressure, Ford issued a public apology in 1927, claiming he had not been aware of the content. Few believed him. The damage was done. The man once hailed as America's hero was now seen as deeply compromised, his achievements shadowed by bigotry. Meanwhile, the company that bore his name was struggling. Henry's stubborn refusal to modernize the Model T, even as competitors introduced sleeker, more advanced cars, nearly destroyed the Ford Motor Company. By the late 1922nd, after producing over 15 million Model Ts, sales collapsed. General Motors under Alfred Sloan overtook Ford with stylish designs, new colors, and installment financing. Henry's insistence on control, his belief that he knew better than the market, led to one of the greatest business missteps of the century. Even as Ford Motor eventually recovered with the introduction of the Model A in 1927, the man himself had lost much of his luster. Once seen as a visionary, he was increasingly viewed as an outdated tyrant, clinging to a past that no longer existed. His workers feared him, his family suffered under him, and his reputation outside America was stained by his words. The contradictions were stark. Here was a man who gave ordinary people the freedom of mobility, yet sought to dictate how they lived. A man who democratized industry, yet spread hatred that fueled division. A man who built America's dream, yet carried within him the seeds of a nightmare. By the time Henry Ford grew old, the world had moved on. His name would forever be tied to innovation and progress, but also to prejudice, authoritarianism, and tragedy. He had changed history, yes, but not always for the better. And when the end finally came, his death would mark not only the close of a life, but the end of an era. Henry Ford died on the 7th of April, 1947, at the age of 83. By then, he was no longer the fiery industrialist who had once shaken the foundations of modern life, but a frail old man watching the world he helped create speed far beyond him. His passing marked the end of an era, the age of the single, towering industrial titan who could bend history to his will. Yet his legacy endures in ways few others can claim. The Ford Motor Company remains one of the largest automobile manufacturers in the world, producing millions of vehicles each year. Its trucks, like the F-Series, dominate American roads, while cars like the Mustang symbolize freedom and rebellion across generations. The Blue Oval is not just a brand, it is a piece of American identity, recognized on highways and in households around the globe. Henry Ford's contributions to industry are immeasurable. His assembly line transformed not only automobiles, but the very fabric of manufacturing, laying the foundation for modern mass production. From electronics to food, from airplanes to smartphones, nearly every industry traces a part of its efficiency back to Ford's vision. He proved that affordability could coexist with scale, that technology could be democratized. In that sense, he gave the 20th century its rhythm, but his legacy is also scarred. His anti-Semitic writings remain a dark stain on his name, a reminder that even the greatest innovators can be undone by their prejudices. His authoritarian approach to business cost him the love of his workers and the health of his only son. For every story of empowerment and freedom his cars created, there is a shadowed tale of control, intolerance, and tragedy. Perhaps that is the final lesson of Henry Ford. Genius and darkness often dwell within the same man. He was a visionary who believed machines could liberate mankind, yet he failed to see how his own beliefs could imprison it. He built America's dream, but his flaws revealed its nightmare. Today, when we see a Ford rolling down the street, we are reminded of more than just a car. We see the echoes of a farm boy who once dismantled watches in Michigan, who dared to imagine freedom on four wheels, and who, whether for better or worse, changed the course of history.